guys, one of you guys suggested that we start a playlist for Unskilled movie reviews. So that has been done. So this video will go on that playlist, the Unskilled movie review playlist. So, Mr. Baseball was recommended to us by somebody. We've got quite a list now because every time we make one of these reviews, someone says, oh, check out this one, or look at this one, or tell us what you think of this one. So someone said, check out Mr. Baseball, tell us what you think. So Mr. Baseball was made in 1992, which is a long time ago now, isn't it? And it had Tom Selleck, who was a bit of a hit at the time. Some of you remember Magnum P.I. and things like that he did. It's the story of an American baseball player who wasn't doing very well in his baseball team. Now, I don't know anything about baseball, okay, so, but you don't really have to for this movie. The baseball was sort of the tool, but it wasn't really totally essential to the movie, you know. But he wasn't doing very well in America, so he was traded to a Japanese team that wasn't doing really well, and so he had to come to Japan, right? So it sort of reminded me of Black Rain that we reviewed recently, because it was a similar sort of story that an American comes to Japan, and his style is an American individualistic style, and he has to work with a Japanese group, and the Japanese group are all about the group style and that dynamic, and a little bit like Lost in Translation as well, because of the observational stuff where, you know, any of you guys that have been to Japan or are living in Japan, the stuff that we relate to. So there was a whole bunch of that. One is he is pretty tall, so he kept hitting his head. Just as a matter of interest, most of the door frames in the old style buildings in Japan are about 180 centimeters. So for those of us who are over 180 centimeters, the chances of hitting your head, you got to be constantly paying attention. And he walked through a doorway and hit his head, and because there's a lot of us that watch that and go, oh yeah, I know that one. And then, oh sorry guys, hard to watch this. See the little kid in the front, in the car in front, standing between the two seats? Everyone's cool with that, they think that's okay. So yeah, he hit his head. He had dinner with somebody's family, and the whole family was sitting there slurping noodles, right? Which, those of you, when you experience that for the first time, is pretty full on, and because that was funny, right, for us, because it's like, yeah, I know what that's like. And then they've told him that it's a polite thing to do, so then he's trying to do it, but he was doing it too much, which isn't cool either. And so they're all looking at him because he was doing it too much. In the dressing rooms of the baseball team, he walked in and walked up to the lockers, and they went, oh, shoes, take your shoes off and put your slippers on, right? So he had to take his shoes off and put on these little slippers that are too small for him. And anybody who spent time in Japan experiences that all the time. You know, I still get caught. I walked into a sports place recently, and usually the Genkan's fairly sort of obvious when you walk in, you know, where you're supposed to take your shoes off, and usually there's a big rack with all shoes in it, and usually another rack with slippers. So usually that's your hint, and it's easy to see it, and often there's a sign as well, you know. So I walked into this sports place recently, and they had lockers around the corner for the shoes, which meant as I walked in, there was no hint. Turned out there was a little sign on the wall, but there was no hint. And I walked in 20 paces and, oh, take your shoes off, please, shoes, shoes. So, you know, it doesn't matter how long you live in Japan, you're always going to experience that now and again. Take your shoes off, and then they give you these little plastic slippers that are way too small, and he's got to shuffle around in them, which, you know, some of us don't like that at all. The watching Japanese TV, again, I think that was in both those other movies, the Lost in Translation and Black Rain. At some stage they watch TV and lie there on a bed with the remote control, and I did that when I first came to Japan. I spent about 6 months doing that every day with a dictionary, and I'd sit there and scroll through the TV channels, you know. And at first it's sort of interesting because all the weird stuff, you know, every time you change the channel there's something else that's weird, and at first it's sort of interesting, and because you're trying to pick up on the language, so at first it's sort of interesting, but that wears off, and then it just becomes just ridiculous. So all that stuff. So yeah, the main sort of central sort of key to the story though was that individualism thing, same as Black Rain. So that underlying American thinking that the individual, or Western thinking, or that particular kind of thinking, we won't put a country on it, but that individualist type thinking, that the individual can save the day, and that doing things your own way. You know, it's interesting, in Western culture we've got a whole heap of things we say like that. You know, he blazes these things that we say in admiration of a person. You know, he blazes his own trail. You know, he makes his own path. He goes his own way, or her way. All those things that we say in admiration of a person who does things their own way. And Japanese culture is exactly the opposite. You know, that you know, some of you might remember I was told by my wife really early when we first met that I was doing something different to what everybody else was doing, and she got really pissed off with me and said, "You think you're smarter than everybody else, don't you?" Which was a real interesting insight, because that's the Japanese thinking. If everybody's doing something a certain way, and this is what was in this movie, everybody's doing this silly thing, and he had to do the silly thing too, and he didn't want to. He wanted to do it his way. And you experience that all the time here. All the time. Everybody's doing something really silly, and you think, no, that's not silly. That's silly. I don't want to do that. I'll do something better. I'll do it a better way. You know, the work smarter, not harder thing, and they don't like that. They like the work harder, not smarter thing, right? Doesn't matter how smart something is, it's how hard you work. That's their thinking, right? So that's sort of the key of the story, same as Black Rain was. That's the key of the story. And then what happens though, of course, because it is an American movie, what does happen though is, in the end, he sort of convinces them to do things a bit more the individualist way, right? And they convince him to sort of be more of a team player. And the end result of those two things combined, which is an interesting story and relatable to some of us. I mean, I'd suggest that's probably what I've achieved in my house, is that I know there's a lot of stuff that is just a shogunai thing. It just can't be helped, and Japanese stuff that I've got to do that's really silly. But I do it because I've got to do it. And I say that to my kids sometimes, if there's some silly thing that they don't want to do, right? And maybe I don't want to do it either, but I say to them, hey, look, it's shogunai, right? It's a shogunai thing. It can't be helped. You just got to do it that way. And then there's other things that we can do differently. We can do my way, or a different way, a more individualist way, where we don't have to do what everybody else is doing. That does happen when you're living in your own house and having your own life. There are opportunities here to do things differently to what other people do. You know, as long as it doesn't rock the boat or cause any problems in the group or embarrass anybody, you know, and that's the balance. And it's sort of what they managed to achieve in this story, was that, you know, he taught them about individualism and being, you know, finding different strengths and weaknesses in individuals and letting them have a bit of freedom to do things their own way. And they taught him to be part of the group and a team player, right? So it was all right. It was all right. I mean, I'm really not into baseball, but there was enough funny things there with the hitting his head and the slippers and the weird TV. I'm just having a quick look here. Yeah, all those things. It was pretty good. Oh, he went to a foreigner bar. That was pretty funny, because foreigner bars, I think I've been to 2 foreigner bars, where you get these bars where all the foreigners hang out, you know, and it's sort of interesting. Some people love it. There are some people who just go to the foreigner bars every week. We actually promote a whole lot of them on our English Friendly directory. There's a couple in Tokyo, and a couple in Nagoya, and a couple in Niseko, and some people like it because it helps them keep their sanity. They go to the foreigner bar and they sit around with the other foreigners, and they feel they can relax and talk to people who can relate to them. So he went to a foreigner bar. So that was interesting. It was like, yeah, there he is in a foreigner bar. Yeah, you know what that's like. But yeah, his irritation and frustration, and that's what we saw in Lost in Translation and Black Rain and this movie, was the irritation and the frustration at some of the silly Japanese stuff. And actually that was in Shogun 2. He got irritated and frustrated. So, and that's really true. That's what it's like for a foreigner in Japan. If you're here long enough, if you just come here for a week, you know, you'll probably be enjoying it so much nothing bothers you probably. But if you stay here, the longer you stay here, the more that sort of stuff comes up, the irritations and frustrations, and we can learn to deal with them and accept things, but it never stops. You always have things here that are irritating and frustrating. The kids standing up in the car, and you know that stuff. I can never come to terms with that, because that fool isn't risking. That's not that car in front of us now, by the way. But the people that do stuff like that here aren't risking their lives. They're risking their child's life. You know, the kid's standing there with their face where the airbag is, you know, and all they got to do is hit a car at 30 kilometres an hour and the bag goes off and break the kid's neck, you know. Stuff like that drives me nuts. And the talking on the phone thing, you know, that sort of stuff. There's stuff here that's irritating and frustrating. The slippers thing's ridiculous. You know, you go to the dentist and you go in the Genkan and you take your shoes off and you get the slippers out of the thing. And I went to the dentist once, and I hate the slippers because they're too small and you got to shuffle in them, and they're just ridiculous, you know. And I went to the dentist once, and I've got a great dentist, and the staff that work there are really good, but just had enough of the fucking slippers. You know? Sorry about the language, but I had enough of the slippers, so took the shoes off and didn't put the plastic slippers on, just in my socks, walked over and sat in the waiting room, and then walked in and sat in the dentist chair. And the girl from the reception, the lady from the reception, came in with the slippers and put them down next to the dentist chair, because you don't wear them in the dentist chair, you just shuffle from the entrance counter to the dentist chair in the slippers, and then you take them off. And then after the dentist is finished, you put them back on and shuffle back to the counter again. So it's like 10 meters, you know. And but you know, that's the system. So you got to wear the plastic slippers, and stuff like that can be just frustrating and irritating. And each of those movies, they showed the characters getting frustrated with the Japanese way of doing things. You know, in Shogun, it was actually quite dark, because you know the people dying for no reason, you know, sort of like suicide missions and stuff like that, you know, dying for no reason. And he got frustrated with that because it was so ridiculous. But the Japanese thinking was, you live and you die and that's it. And so he was really, and again, that's one of those things. The slippers thing's just a little bit annoying, but something really serious like that, like, you know, life or death, which is my feeling about the kids standing up in cars and people holding up their smartphones while they're driving and things like that. There's life or death stuff. That stuff can be really upsetting, you know, really disturbing to some people. So that irritation and frustration thing, you know, the irritation and frustration thing. So yeah, family slurping noodles, that was funny. That was really funny. The whole family sitting there slurping up the noodles, and he's sort of, oh, and he's trying to eat them quietly, because some of us were brought up that when you eat, you got to eat quietly, you know. If I made slurping noises when I was a kid, I would have got told to learn some manners. And it's the opposite here. It's the opposite. So he was sitting there trying to deal with the sound of them all slurping noodles, which is an awful sound if you're not used to it. And yeah, horrible noise. And then he was told he should do it too because it's polite. But then when he did it too much, and they're all looking at him like it was disgusting, you know. So yeah, it's all right. It's all right. Again, as with those other movies on that playlist now, that are now on that playlist, if you're into Japan, I think that's the thing. If it wasn't about Japan, if all that stuff that I was talked about is stuff I could relate to. So for that reason, I sort of found it interesting. So if you're into Japan, yeah, you'll probably find it interesting. Whether you're into baseball or not doesn't really matter. It's just the story, you know. And it was a good story. It was well done. It was well done. So the person who recommended we watch it, thanks very much. For the person who recommended a playlist, you now have a playlist, and this video will be on it. So there it was, Mr. Baseball, 1992, Tom Selleck, with his big 1992 mustache that they told him to shave off. They told him to shave off his giant mustache because none of the other guys had giant mustaches, so he had to shave his off, right? So anyway, I hope I haven't spoiled the story. I don't think I have. It's all the stuff's still good. So if you're interested, check it out, see what you think. Anyway, that's enough of that. Another person sitting there between the seats. That car in front, there was a person between the seats with no seatbelt on. Anyway, you get that. More videos coming soon.